There was a man named Ronald Reed. He worked as a janitor for 25 years. Then he pumped gas at a service station for another 17. He drove a used car. He wore a second-hand coat held together with a safety pin. He lived in the same modest house he bought in 1959 and never moved. When Ronald Reed died in 2014 at the age of 92, the world expected to find almost nothing. What they found instead was an $8 million investment portfolio quietly accumulated over decades by a janitor who simply bought shares in companies he understood, never sold, and let time do what time does when you leave it alone. He left $6 million to his local hospital and library. Nobody knew. Now here's what makes this story so unsettling and so important. At the exact same time, thousands of highly educated, well-paid financial professionals with MBAs, Bloomberg terminals, and access to information Ronald Reed could never have imagined were underperforming him. Not because they were less intelligent, not because they were lazy, because they forgot something Ronald Reed never needed to be taught. That building wealth is not a maths problem. It is a behavior problem, and that's the entire argument of one of the most quietly revolutionary personal finance books written in the last 20 years. The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. This is not a book about stock picking or budgeting formulas. It is a book about how human beings actually think about money and why that thinking, far more than intelligence or income, determines who ends up wealthy and who doesn't. Let's break it. Section 1. No one is crazy. The first idea Housel puts on the table is one of the most generous and disarming in the book, and it reframes almost every money conversation you've ever had. He says nobody is crazy about money. Every financial decision a person makes, no matter how irrational it looks from the outside, makes sense to them. Given the experiences they've had, the fears they carry, and the world they grew up in. Someone who lived through the Great Depression will never feel fully safe in the stock market. No matter what the data says, someone who grew up watching a parent lose everything in a housing crash will never fully trust real estate. Someone who never had money will treat the first taste of it like it could disappear at any moment because in their experience, it always did. Housel's point is precise. We don't make financial decisions on a spreadsheet. We make them at a dinner table, shaped by memories, emotions, and inherited beliefs that were formed long before we ever opened a brokerage account. This matters enormously because it means that before you can change how you handle money, you have to understand the psychological framework you're already using, the one built by your childhood, your parents, your first experience of financial fear or security. Most personal finance advice skips this entirely. It hands you a framework and says follow the rules. But if your internal world is running a different operating system, the rules will never stick. The first pattern to break: stop judging your financial behavior as rational or irrational. Start asking, where did this come from? Section 2. Getting wealthy is not staying wealthy. This is the distinction Housel draws that I think hits the hardest and the one most people never see coming. Getting wealthy and staying wealthy are completely different skills, and the qualities that build one can actively destroy the other. Getting wealth requires optimism, risk-taking, a willingness to back yourself, be wrong, and try again. It rewards boldness, confidence, and a certain amount of ego. Staying wealthy requires the opposite. It requires humility. It requires paranoia, a healthy, constant awareness that the market doesn't care about your track record, that one catastrophic decision can erase a decade of gains, and that the #1 rule in finance is never let a loss become permanent. Housel describes this as the importance of staying in the game, and he argues it is the single most underrated concept in all of personal finance. Here's why: the mathematics of compounding, the most powerful force in wealth building, requires time above everything else. But compounding can only work on money that is still in the game. The investor who earns a 20% return for 10 years and then loses everything in year 11 doesn't come out ahead of someone who earned a steady 8%, for 30 years without ever blowing up. Survival is the strategy, not the flashy return. Not the bold call, staying in the game long enough for compounding to do what it was always going to do, but only to the person patient enough to let it. This is what Ronald Read understood without ever reading a textbook. He didn't need to be smart, he needed to stay in the room. Section 3, The Lessons That Change Everything. Now the framework. Housel builds the book around short, devastating observations about how we actually think about money. Here are the ones that land differently once you see them. Lesson 1: Wealth is what you don't see. This sounds simple. It isn't. Housel makes a surgical distinction between wealth and riches. Riches are visible: the car, the watch, the house, the lifestyle that signals success to others. Wealth is invisible. It's the money not spent, the assets accumulated quietly, the financial runway that gives someone options. Here's the uncomfortable implication: when you see someone driving an expensive car, you know they spent the money. You don't know if they're wealthy. And the person who looks rich is almost always spending in a way that prevents them from ever becoming it. True wealth is built by resisting the pull to perform success and quietly accumulating the thing nobody else can see. Lesson 2: Freedom is the highest dividend money pays. Housel argues that the real point of money, the thing that actually makes people happier, is not what it buys. It's the control it gives you over your time. The ability to wake up and choose how you spend the next 8 hours. To say no to work that degrades you. To be present with people you love without a financial emergency pulling you away. This reframes the entire purpose of saving. You're not saving to buy something later. You're saving to buy options: the option to leave, to stay, to choose, to rest. And that form of wealth is available at almost any income level if you understand what you're actually building toward. Lesson 3: You'll change and your future self is a stranger. One of the quietest but most damaging financial mistakes Housel identifies is the assumption that what you want today is what you'll want in 10 years. People lock themselves into long-term financial plans built around a version of themselves that no longer exists by the time the plan matures. The 30-year-old who optimizes everything for early retirement discovers at 50 that identity without work feels empty. The person who saves obsessively for a future that looks different once they arrive. Housel's prescription: build in flexibility. Leave room to change direction. Avoid the financial decisions that lock you in so completely that the person you become can't renegotiate. Lesson 4: Volatility is the price of admission, not a fine. This is the insight that should change how every investor responds to a market crash. Markets go down, sometimes dramatically, sometimes for years. And most investors treat this volatility as a punishment, evidence that something is wrong, that they made the wrong call, that they should exit before it gets worse. Housel reframes it completely: volatility is not a fine for doing something wrong. It's the admission fee for doing something right. It's the price you pay to access the long-term returns that the stock market has historically delivered to everyone patient enough to hold through the pain. The investor who understands this sits calmly through a 30% drop. The one who doesn't sells at the bottom, locks in the loss, and misses the recovery. Same market, same data. Completely different outcome determined entirely by how they think about what the volatility means. Lesson 5: Reasonable beats rational. Purely rational financial decisions, the ones that maximize expected mathematical return, are often impossible to sustain in the real world. Because real human beings have emotions, relationships, and psychological needs that a spreadsheet doesn't account for. Housel's advice: aim for reasonable, not perfect. A financial strategy you can actually stick to through fear, uncertainty, and the noise of daily life is worth infinitely more than the theoretically optimal strategy you'll abandon the first time it feels uncomfortable. The best investment plan is the one you'll stay married to. Section 4: The Reframe That Changes Everything. Here's the idea from this book I want you to hold on to longest. Housel spends the last section of the book on a concept he calls enough, and it's the one that makes everything else make sense. He argues that one of the most dangerous financial diseases is goalpost moving. You hit the target you set. And instead of feeling the satisfaction you expected, you reset the target higher and begin the same chase all over again. More, bigger, further. And in that endless pursuit, people take risks they don't need to take with money they've already built, chasing a feeling of enough that keeps migrating ahead of them. Housel names what happens next, and it's sobering people who spend decades building something real, destroy it in a single decision because they couldn't define the moment when they had enough to stop. The people who come out ahead, he argues, are not always the most talented, not always the highest earners. They're the ones who got clear, early, about what enough looks like for them, and then built their entire financial life around protecting it rather than endlessly exceeding it. Enough is not a ceiling, it's a compass. And most people never find it, because nobody ever taught them to look. So here's the pattern this book is asking you to break. The pattern of believing that financial success is a knowledge problem, that if you just had the right stock tips, the right budget formula, the right advisor, everything would click into place. Morgan Housel's argument is quieter and more fundamental than that. Your relationship with money is a reflection of your relationship with fear, with time, with identity, and with the version of success you inherited from people who may never have questioned it themselves. Change the behavior. Understand the psychology. Define enough before the market defines it for you. Stay in the game long enough for compounding to do what it was always going to do. And build wealth the way Ronald Read built it, not with brilliance, not with access, not with luck, with patience, with consistency, and with the rare underestimated discipline of simply not stopping. Think differently. Live intentionally. Know a question to you. What is the most important lesson you learned from today's video? Leave it in the comments section, and then don't forget to subscribe and like. I'll see you in the next one.